welcome to The Good, the Bad and the Worst, a podcast where we watch movie trilogies and decide which movie is the mind killer, the little death that brings obliteration. I'm your host, Griner, and joining me today...
I am the Emperor, and I killed your father, because he was a man who believed in the rules of the heart, but the heart is not meant to rule.
That's so good. Dreams make good stories, but everything important happens when we're awake. So stick your hand in my box and feel some pain.
All right, we are doing Dune Part 1 and 2. Not truly a trilogy yet. That remains to be seen, I suppose.
It's coming.
It's coming? I'm not sure. I'm not convinced. We'll see.
Oh, okay.
Let's get to it. We'll talk about it later. But to kick things off, are you guys big Dune heads? Luke, did you have any Dune knowledge before 2021?
Not before 2021, but I would consider myself a Dune head since then. I want the popcorn bucket. That's how much I love these movies.
Take it to the bedroom by yourself.
Yeah, exactly. I love these films. I really do. I was just talking to my wife earlier that like these feel so epic and I feel so unique and like I haven't stopped thinking about the second one since I watched it and I want to go back and watch it again. I want to go back and watch the first one, even though I watched it the night before I watched the second one. Now I want to go back and watch it again. Just visually, everything. I love these films, so I'm really interested in this world.
Yeah, I have no connection to Dune at all, really. Like I've known that it's kind of one of those pillars of sci-fi literature, very revered, really influential, as you can sort of see in these movies. But I'm a big Denis Villeneuve fan, and so anything he does, I'm there for. And so when he announced he was doing Dune, without even knowing anything about really what Dune meant or would be, I was like, yeah, it's going to be great because Denis taking on Lawrence of Arabia / Star Wars / Lord of the Rings. Like, how could this go wrong? And it didn't go wrong. It went so right.
Yeah, I was a bit like you. I knew Dune was, one of the big heavy hitters in sci-fi. Whenever I was looking at like, what's something like Star Wars I can get into, it was always like top of the list. Obviously, a huge influence on Star Wars itself. And then when I heard Denis was making an adaptation, I'm like, all right, I'm going to read the books, or read the book anyway. And I did. I read it to my daughter while she was in hospital just after she was born.
Oh, that's cute.
So I'll always have that cute memory. I don't know how much of it she remembered. She may start using the voice on me one day. And I'll just have to do what she says. But
she wake up going to screaming fear is the mind killer. Like,
yeah,
another dream.
See, I thought you were going to say that you were like reading it to your daughter while she was in your wife's belly and she was like telling you about it back, being like, oh, I remember that. This is a great story, Dad.
Yeah, yeah, she's talking to me.
Talking fetus.
Talking to me in a really weird, creepy way that I'm surprised more people weren't creeped out by. But anyway.
Maybe she'll be Anna Taylor-Joy one day. You know?
Yeah, she's famous.
It's true. Maybe I can retire and live off her famousness. That's what good parents do, isn't it?
Exactly.
Amen, brother.
All right, let's kick it off with some stats. Stats. Dune Part 1, released 2021, had a budget of $165 million, made $433 million worldwide, $100 million North America. Dune had a Metacritic score of 74 and a Rotten Tomatoes score of 83, if you like that garbage website. Dune Part 2, 2024, budget of $190 million. It's only been out for one weekend, but worldwide has made $178 million, 85 of that in North America. Metacritic score of 79 and a Rotten Tomatoes score of 93.
And worth mentioning, an IMDb score of 9 currently has number 11 in the top 250.
Yes, which is it's pretty wild.
Yeah, that'll fall, but it will
fall. It's not the first movie to come out quite high like that and then fall over time.
It kind of blows my mind that it's been 3 years since the first one. I feel like it's flown by. I feel like I only just got introduced to the series like a year ago. To think we talked about it on the podcast like as at our end of year that year, and now here we are 3 years later.
Yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting movie to look back on because it came out like pretty well smack bang in the middle. Well, not in the middle of the pandemic, but the pandemic was still in full swing.
Yeah.
And I think you can definitely see that reflected in its box office. I think at the time it was definitely heralded as a little bit of a flop. Like $100 million North America on a $165 million budget is not a great return, I think.
No.
I think it performed better than Warner Brothers was expecting, though.
Yeah.
Because it was day and day. So
True.
it's actually pretty impressive to think of that. You made nearly half a billion on a day and day release. Like that's, I don't know. It is hard to gauge if it was a success or not, but like I don't know what those numbers cumulative are. But when you think this was probably one of the few movies that got people to come back to the cinema, like the fact that people were coming to see it even though they could have stayed home and streamed it. Like,
And like two things, I've forgotten that it was day and date because I remember going to the movies, watching it, coming home, then realizing that it was available to watch, and then watching it with my wife, being like, "Okay, now you should watch it." And she's like, "Didn't you just watch it in the cinema?" She's like, "Why do you just watch this at home in the first place?" And I was like, "Because cinema, you have to."
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I think it kind of got a cult status after that. I feel like it had legs more, like in the word of mouth of people. I feel like it's talked a bit more since then.
Yeah, I think so. And I don't know. Do you guys think studios put a bit of stock in having like an epic on their books? Like this is one of those big movies that people will talk about for a long time. It's an adaptation of a book that has been dying for a good adaptation. Like it's kind of it's a bit of a thing that it's been considered an impossible book to adapt.
Filmable.
Unfilmable. The other adaptations, I mean, they vary in quality, but they're pretty garbage. I've watched bits and pieces of them for the fun of it. Like, do you think studios care about having something like prestigious like that on their books, I suppose, even if it doesn't make the most money in the world? I don't know. I'd like to think they do, but capitalism, man, everything's got to make money.
I do think that happens. Like the one that comes to mind in that comparison is someone like Paul Thomas Anderson. He keeps getting given like checks to make movies, but none of his movies have made money. All of his movies would be commercially considered flops, really. Like everything past There Will Be Blood. But it's like there's something about the fact that he's just such an important filmmaker to all the people who follow that. And all the peers in the industry, people respect him, so they just keep giving him money. I think there's an element of that. Like for every two movies that companies will be like, we have to make sure this is an IP like trilogy that's going to make bank. They do want to have something else because they know the Oscars still carry some sort of weight, just the respect of their peers, and I think there is an awareness that like their brand legacy is correlated with their success down the road. So if people go, Warner Brothers have Dune, the one the holy grail of sci-fi that was made really well, they're like, oh, okay, this is a company that matters. Like this is a company that can achieve things that are unachievable. Like what Lord of the Rings did for Weinstein's company. Yeah, New Line. Like they really made a huge impact on that by having this even though it was a commercial success. Like I think it's not all just driven by money. There is a sense of prestige and like critical quality that does come into the equation.
Yep.
I think just mainstream attention, even if it doesn't do stuff at the box office, I feel like, especially the second one now, but everyone's talking about it. Like,
like I think this one has paid off because if you look at the second one's made a lot of money in its opening weekend. I think everyone's considering it pretty well a success. From a box office standpoint, and I mean, I would hate to see it fall into other hands, but I do think Dune could be something that they continue to make movies, and I mean even TV of down the road. Like there is the setup for a franchise there to some degree. I think
they are doing that. Like there is a Bene Gesserit TV show that's somewhere in development that was announced, and not sure what's happening with that, but it's just something's happening. Denis himself has said like he's nearly finished the script for the third one. And so, that's not officially green lit yet, but judging by the numbers, it almost definitely will be. And then, beyond there, I think he'll end. And then I see that happening, right? I see, especially because I think Warner Brothers and HBO are owned. Warner Brothers owned HBO, doesn't it? Yeah, Warner Brothers Discovery. And, they did it with like the Batman, they're doing the Penguin series. Every time anything makes any impact, they'll be like, let's get some seasons into this. And like it's just such an expansive universe you can do it. We've seen it with Lord of the Rings and Star Wars. Like all this peripheral material just gets adapted as soon as one thing's successful, which the quality varies, but I guess we'll see what comes of that, and that's
I mean, there's a lot of Dune books, but there's only 6, I think, that were written by Frank Herbert. Like, there's a heap that weren't. There's a lot of material there they can cover. It's a rich vein of spice they can tap.
Nice.
I'd be down for a HBO series of just like the Holy Wars or whatever.
I mean, I think we get that in a movie, but
you reckon?
Yeah, but I mean, I don't know. Like, we'll get into it, but one of the things I really like about this movie and the way it's shot, and even the book is like this too, where you just get little glimpses of the larger universe. Like, there's all these guilds that they don't go into in the movies, all these different sects that all have interesting backstories. There are books about some of them, there aren't others, and like I say, there's lots they can do.
It's good. Yeah, it's a question I want to ask with movie 2, especially like regarding that. The universe and TV versus movie, but we can address that later.
All right, let's get into Dune Part 1. A noble family becomes embroiled in a war for control over the galaxy's most valuable asset, while its heir becomes troubled by visions of a dark future.
Yeah. What a cool plot.
What a great plot.
What a type of plot. Every movie does it.
Obviously, these movies like take a lot of influence from Star Wars.
You keep saying this, and man, it annoys me. It shouldn't, but man, it annoys me.
No.
Every time we talk about this movie and we mention Star Wars, you're like, "Oh, did this come out before Star Wars?" Like, yes, well and truly, Luke. Well and truly.
So that's the thing. Like, it's hard to not watch it and get Star Wars vibes. Obviously, I prefer these films over Star Wars. I feel like, especially these days with the way Star Wars has gone. But
modern Star Wars,
it's so cool to see where Star Wars got its influence. You know, like to see stuff and be like that's the thing. I remember watching it for the first time and being like, oh, I feel like I'm watching like a new version of Star Wars, like, you know, like, oh, this is going to blow up like this. Like, this is so cool. We've got the Emperor, we've got the Empire. Like, this is really cool. You've got Tatooine. Like, this is really cool. But it's hard to not feel them vibes. But obviously, I feel like a much more mature version of that world, and one that I really, really enjoy. And I think Denis is the perfect person for this universe, because there's so many shots that just I like, especially in the second one, but we're talking about the first one, but just I'm blown away. Like, so many cool visual things, big grand things, but also just simple things of like Stellan Skarsgård's character, like the way, like the Baron, just the way he like floats off the table. In the first movie, there's the scene where he starts floating and coming down towards the table, and I remember just being like creeped out by it. I'm like, oh, it's so effective. Everything he does in this film.
Yeah, it's like this kind of is, even for the first one, the second one especially, like you say, it feels like this is this generation's Star Wars. And you get those, like I said before, Grant, you get an epic every now and then, like, you know, there was Lawrence of Arabia back in the day that everybody saw, and then Star Wars obviously comes out, and then you get Lord of the Rings, and then for a long time nothing happened, and now we have this, and this is
Marvel. I guess Marvel was
like Marvel filled
epic.
that, but Marvel again is like everything and nothing. It replaced every genre by becoming like, it's because they're not really true epics. They have elements of it for sure, but that kind of became, you're right, that became sort of
Harry
what
Potter.
we asked for. Yeah, I don't know
Twilight.
if I call it quite the, like, these franchises came out. They're not the same. They're not epics.
Twilight.
How is an epic defined then? Like, what is the criteria for a movie becoming an epic?
I think definitely, like, the main thing I would just say is scope, but
no, I think I'd agree, and I think that's like where Harry Potter really falls down, is that particularly early on, like, there's a very clearly limited budget. It's a fairly small scope. It definitely grows over time. And Marvel's a weird one, you're right. Like, it definitely has the scope for the most part, but
but they also don't, because they're all kind of, they do, because they're like, oh, it's world-defying odds, and it's, you know, a super villain's got to crush the universe, but it feels very small comparatively. Like, I mean, epic coming from the poem, it means what? Narrating the deeds and adventures of heroic or legendary figures of the past history of a nation, But then looking at like movie epics, you've got things like Gone with the Wind, and that is like that sprawls about 30 years, huge characters, and like historical. It feels more like you're almost learning a history of something. In Marvel, you're never learning of the history of, they tell you about the Sokovia Accords, and that's about it. You're never like, this is an entire. Oh, I'm sorry, Luke, you disagree? You think you learn a lot about.
Well, I mean,
is this going to devolve into a friggin' Marvel's?
No. But I'm just like, I feel like you can't watch Endgame or Infinity War and not feel like those are these like epic movies, and the other films not telling the history in a way. Like
that's epic as in big. They're not epic as in like a genre.
That's awesome.
Like I guess I think we've used the word epic has lost every meaning. Something's cool. It's like that was really epic. It's like no, this it's like awesome. Awesome actually means something pretty big. Epic is like epic as a genre is a different beast. And I think even though you've had those big franchises, they're not epics. Like epics do feel kind of like you were in a whole different world and you were learning the history of a place. And that's why you have something like Lord of the Rings. You learn all about this entire spanning universe. And this. Anyway, before all this to say is that this is this generation's epic. I do feel like audiences are kind of there for it because it's kind of why you go to the movies. You go for this big spectacle, and whether you're a sci-fi or a fantasy fan, there's something about that people are just kind of into. And you can't do it you can't make Lawrence of Arabia anymore because people don't quite care about some explorer in the 20s or whatever. But you can make a badass sci-fi adaptation of a book that a lot of people have probably read or know about. And that's, both these tick that box.
Fair enough. Game of Thrones, is that an epic?
Probably, but...
It's an epic TV, right? Like...
Yeah, TV is, again, that's kind of different. Like a TV, like talking about movie epics is pretty different to a TV epic because a movie epic feels different to 10 hours of a series of the same events. And I don't know. We can come back to that when we talk about Game of Thrones, I guess.
Talk about it on our epic podcast.
Feels like the wrong place to really negotiate this.
It's place to unpack it.
Every fortnight. Is this movie an epic? Let's discuss.
That's that new channel.
Yep.
Quality content.
Called Epic.
Anyway.
No, go ahead. I was just going to say, I love the opening of this movie and the introduction to Arrakis and how we just get all these really Denis has outdone himself. He makes sand really interesting, flying over Arrakeen, I think is the name of the main city. It's just this really weird alien architecture, and then you get down into the nitty gritty and you're learning about the people. You're learning about these sacred trees that take as much water as 10 men. I don't know. I think he does a really good job of introducing Arrakis, introducing the world, the main conflicts. It's just chef's kiss. Very, very well done.
It does kind of the great thing that all sci-fi does, where it all feels a little bit familiar but a little bit different too.
Yep.
Where you see the desert, but it's glimmering. It's like, oh, okay, something's up. And you see a city that feels like a city, but there's a little bit off the arc. I know I talked about this last time, but the architecture every time I watch this movie is just the incredibly stark brutalism and these huge slabs of nothing, and just everybody is so dwarfed in this. Everyone is tiny unless the camera is right up in their face. It's a really cool contrast of whenever you're meant to feel how small and insignificant they are compared to this world, you do, because they're just in these enormous caves or they're in a desert that it goes forever. But then when you need to care about them, it's not just over the shoulder basic filmmaking. It's no, it's in their face, and you feel like you're there with this person, and it's intimate. And it's you get that grey share of this world that sort of speaks to it. It's a world that doesn't care about them, and it's a world that is more important than them, like all good sci-fi. But when you need to care about them, you're made to care about them by being in their space. It's really good filmmaking, and it's the kind of thing that sci-fi especially needs to work well, I think, because I don't know. We get a lot of bad sci-fi in movies where it's just either it's too far out or it's too focused on its world building, or it doesn't. It just feels really bland. Yeah. Where it's the perfect marriage of all of that. Everything feels alien, but also familiar, and so you feel like you're there on Arrakis with them.
Yep. The movie does a really good job at giving you a bit of a personal touch too. It does. More than I don't want to be the guy that's in the books, but more than the books, it feels like Paul's story, like the Atreides story, in a lot of ways. Like it's a pretty impersonal book, honestly. But like following Paul on his journey through this is really like, hats off to Timothy Chalamet. I didn't really know anything about the guy before these movies, but he feels like a small boy in the first movie. Like he feels like a child in a lot of ways. He's definitely in his father's shadow. Doesn't know where he belongs in the world, and I think he plays that character really well. And then, like, we'll get to it with Dune Part 2, but he really matures in that he feels like a leader, and he's charismatic, and I don't know. I really enjoy although I think all the performances in these movies are really good. Like I don't think I could point to one that I think is really, really bad. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. No, the casting is amazing. And it's got such a, like, having Oscar Isaac as his dad, there is a real feeling of like the old guard and the new. And it happens more in Part 2, where you have like a string of the biggest young actors kind of like taking the movie and making it theirs. Whereas in this one, there's a lot more of like, you got Brolin, Momoa, Isaac, Rebecca Ferguson, like this older generation of like incredibly competent actors. And like Chalamet is holding his own, but there is this feeling of like these are the old, like the greats. And whose story is this? And it's Timothy's, and he's got to sort of make it his own and take it. It's a good casting choice by having. It's one of the few movies that all the big names I found, like, I didn't find distracting. There's never a moment where I'm like, why is Oscar Isaac in this?
What about? I mean, I know this is Part 2. What about Anya Taylor-Joy?
Yeah, no, it's saying like it's a cameo, and it is sure it's a nod of like, oh, that's Anya Taylor. I get it.
Yeah,
but I'm like, with a movie this big and sort of titanic, I'm like, yes, of course you would have Anya Taylor-Joy. Who else? Like, no one else could be in this movie that has like this feel. It makes it feel like the most important event in the world. It makes it feel like this is a battle for the spice that controls the universe. And if you had a bunch of no names, it would actually, I think, do a disservice in a way, because it would almost be like this. It would almost feel smaller stakes. But by having every good actor in it just acting the hell out of it, you're like, yeah, this is important.
That's the thing. Grant touched on it earlier. Like, I love the whole opening this movie. How you get to meet the Baron, and he's like in a sauna. He's got this like device on his spine that's like cracking like as he sits up a bit. And you're seeing these people who are like super pale and all just dark armor, and it's all dark and miserable. You have the Atreides planet, and it's water, and it's like very Scotland-esque, and then just boom, like straight into just desert and bright sun, dust. Like it's like a very big contrast. And I like what you said earlier, Conan, about the structures and everything. That's the thing. It's not trying to make these people seem larger than life almost. So it's like everything dwarfs them, like they're flying in on these big planes. Like I think even the scene of Jason Momoa and him talking, it's like in this huge area with them two are just catching up sort of thing. And visually I can't gush enough about these films. I feel like it's just a visual treat. I feel like there's one bad shot in this whole film, in the first one.
Which one's that? Which one?
And it's Chalamet's face in the armor, where it looks really CGI'd, where it's like a vision of the future, and he's like doing all this, and it turns and it shows him with blue eyes, and it's like just his face imposed the armor when it lifts up.
Yeah, I know the scene you're talking about. Yeah, because they play with it again later because it's Shani in the armor.
Exactly,
but it's I think it is a little strange. You're right.
But that's
I think it's supposed to feel really out of place though, because it's him with blue eyes, and he doesn't understand what that means.
Vision,
necessarily.
I guess,
yeah. There's a couple of scenes in the second one. I just want to put a note here so I remember to talk about them. They feel a kind of a similar thing. They feel weird, and I wonder if it's the point or not, because there was a couple of scenes in the second one where I'm like, either that's bad or it's intentionally making me feel.
That's the thing. I feel like it almost has to be intentional, because I found it jarring because of how good everything else looks. Like everything else looks so damn good. Like I'm a fan of Corridor Crew, like the YouTube channel that analyzes CGI. And I remember them just going over the first movie and just being like, how do they do this stuff? Like it's like absolutely insane how good the CGI is in these films. And it's not like they're beating you over the head with CGI. feels grounded in a lot of weird ways, but
Yeah.
it's really effective. And like little visual things, like the way the sand moves when a worm's coming, like it's like it feels iconic now. Like as soon as you see it, it's like, oh my god, here
Yeah.
it comes.
Sandworm's coming.
Yeah, it's I
No,
just
you're
and yeah, the first time you see the worm, like when it rises up and like and it's almost sunset at like night sort of thing, and it just looks outstanding, looks amazing.
No, you're right. The visual, like this movie, is just a visual feast, and I think that's why it's has been successful and is still successful. Is like it just like Denis he did an interview recently where he was like, I don't care about dialogue. Like that's not my thing. Like I work in movies. I don't even want to do TV because that's not my medium. He's like, I'm a visual storyteller, and that's kind of what you generally want from a filmmaker, and that's what you want in this kind of story as well, where the world and the images tell that story. Where a giant sandworm is enough to be like, okay, I understand so much. And like say, because there is one world where you have, sorry, there are three worlds. There's one where you have like, David Lynch Dune or like low budget TV series Dune, where the CGI looks really bad. There's one world where you have a Marvel version where it's purely just like, look at this massive CG everything, and it looks like Obi-Wan or something, where it's just this really bad green screen desert and everything looks piss poor. But or you have this world where everything, like, because for a lot of it is tactile and real. Like they filmed on site in deserts, and they build structures and models, and they did that. And so then when you get those images, like there's that scene where the Empire ship comes down, and there's just this enormous army, and it's just kind of watching the ship slowly descend, and you're just like, is this real? Like, am I actually watching a space? Like, I don't really know. Or then scenes where like the Baron will just float, or someone will sort of like levitate up.
Yeah, anytime like the Sardaukar coming, like a hovering down out of a ship or whatever, and it's like, is this a bunch of people actually doing this? Like, what is happening here?
You're like, that's impossible. You can't CG that. They can't have cables because there's no jerk. You're like, what's going on? And it feels so real. Like, same with the sand. Even though it's shining, it feels like it is kind of this magical, corporeal thing because they just use it sparingly, like enough to make a difference. Like, that's what you want. It just, it never feels cheap or bad.
I know I'm saying something from 2 again, but it just reminds me of this thing from number 1 as well. But near the start of 2, where you see like the Sardaukar and they're going up that mountain, and it's like they're swimming. It's literally just effortless, paddling their feet, like floating in the air. And I'm like, that's such a cool visual. And it's not like a jetpack that's boosting them, like harshly jolting them forward. They're just gliding through the air, like, and just basic. It's as if I'm like, did they film this underwater and then the CGI here because it's super cool and unreal, but also real, and it's like, it's really cool. And just touching on like visual side of it again, there's a scene that I really love in the first one, like with the Bene Gesserit, where they do the test with Paul basically, and it's like outside at night, it's just all fog, and you see the like the ship rise up and just like the lights beaming down from it, and
it feels really alien. It's really well done,
And the music adds so much to it. My boy Hans Zimmer, Conan.
Look, when he wants to do good, he does good. No one's disputing that.
I think he always wants to do good, but I think sometimes he just smashes it out of the park. Yeah,
I think sometimes
scores are great.
No, I agree, and like the story behind that is fun, right? He intentionally turned down Nolan for Tenet because his longtime BFF, because he's like, I can't not do Dune. I'm sorry.
And Nolan's never forgiven him. He hasn't got him since.
I love this world where Nolan's like, curse you, Denis and Han. You guys went and made the best sci-fi movie ever, and like you can just tell he's mad.
Yeah,
but that's what you feel in this movie. You feel the passion of like 1,000 people who grew up reading these books and like just love. Sort of probably got into like sci-fi or got into a lot of storytelling because of it. You can just tell Denis was like always wanted to make this movie. You can tell Hans like this is important.
Yeah. And
like the influences of this have seeped into all of their work since. And so you get usually when there's this project that everyone's passionate about and you can tell people care about, it's like alchemy. You just get the perfect synthesis of what is meant to happen. And like this isn't like neither of these movies are perfect, but they are like the perfect version of probably what you could have as a movie adaptation of them. If that makes sense. So I don't know if we need to unpack that, but it's like every time I watch the first and then the second film, I'm just like, holy crap. Like I'm just in awe of what they could do.
Honestly, like these are excellent adaptations. I think the first one is like super true to the book. Like there's not a lot of holes I can pick into it of things they've changed. Dune 2, we'll talk about it. but again, almost a perfect adaptation, I think, in a lot of ways.
I wanted to ask, did you guys ever brush up against because like one is a very world building. It's like, and it's an interesting kind of blockbuster because it is like, it's almost not a story. It is like set up for the story, right? And like, did you guys brush up then, or what do you think of that?
Yeah, I said this to Luke. Like, even in the book, this is like the first third of the book, and it feels like set up for what comes next, and that's what the movie felt like too. And I did like the first time I saw this movie, I actually didn't love it. Like, I was a little bit frustrated by it. It felt like the setup for what was coming next. It, it just, I don't know, it just felt a little incomplete. But then watching it a second time, I all those fears were brushed away. I don't know what my problem was, but
do you think that was because you knew like 2 was coming, and you're like, okay, this is fine because it's part of something bigger?
Yeah, potentially. Maybe it's the things I really wanted to see come later, and I have to be patient. And maybe I was frustrated by that.
You mentioned this when we watched it, but like the first one is like the first third of the book. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's not a long way into the book. Like, Duke Leto dies very quickly in the book. Like,
okay. That's interesting. Yeah, I would love to know what the original version, like, because I guess we'll never know, but I would love to know what Warner Brothers agreed on and what Denis was doing. Like, I wonder if they were like, you're only going to get one shot, and he was like, I will take that gamble and make the first part. Or if they were like, don't worry, you'll always get 2 parts. And he, like, I wonder what that version looked like, right? If they always knew what they were doing, or if it was just like serendipitous that they managed to get a sequel and like, great, we can finish this story now. Or because that would be pretty funny if it was just Dune 1 came out and we never got a sequel, and it'd be like,
I feel like there had to always be a sequel greenlit to some degree. Like, I'm not sure there's a third one greenlit. We can talk about it more later, but yeah.
Right on.
Yeah.
I just wanted to, sorry, I know I'm dipping back, but the visual storytelling is, I don't know, it's amazing in this movie, I feel like, because I feel like the book isn't great at it. Like, so there's a scene where he's fighting with Gurney, and they're sparring with the knives because Frank Herbert loves knife fights, if you guys didn't notice. And in the book, there's like a long exposition about how the shields work and how you need to drive a blade in slowly to get through the shields. Just quick strikes won't hit it. And then Denis just blows it out of the park by giving it a red or a blue effect, like whether it's going to get through or not. And it's so effective, and you know immediately what's happening. You don't need, like, they do talk about it while they're fighting, but you don't need a long exposition about how these shields work. You understand straight away, you know, these red hits are not hitting. It's going really red because he's driving it in, and then he uses it over and over again. Like, there's the scene where there's the dart and the ambush. Well, I like the ambush where they're blowing up their ships, and they drop the bombs down, and they just sit there, and it just turns redder and redder and redder until it makes it through, and then the explosion happens. And they use that effect quite a few times, but man, it's so visually effective. It tells the story of those shields instantly. Like, nobody has any question about how they work after that. And I feel like Denis does that multiple times in this movie, where it's a concept that's laid out in the book, and it's kind of complex and kind of dry, and then here he comes with his visual storytelling and just knocks it out of the park. And yeah, it's great.
Yeah,
I think you come out of that little, like, the sparring session, and basically you just know what that means. So when you see it with the bombs dropping, you're not even like, well, what's going on with the shields? Like, you just know, and it adds tension to it, because like the second you see it red, you're like, oh god, this person's gonna get it. Like, he's pushed it away, and like the thing with the dart where he's trying to stop it before it's getting in, it adds so much more tension to it. I feel like, instead of just him getting hit with the dart, or like, you know, it's really, really cool.
Yeah, that's what I mean by saying it's like the best visual adaptation of this you could get, because it takes a concept that works in a book, shouldn't work on screen if you just put it. If you had Josh Brolin talking for 10 minutes, and it's like, cool, this is how we visually tell it. Like, on the second watch especially, I was really impressed with how sort of much it trusts the audience. Like, going back to Marvel and how shit Marvel is. That is a whole genre that doesn't trust the audience, right? It needs to make everything constantly clear and go, don't worry, this person's from here and they might turn up later, so you don't worry, no one dies, because it's all, it holds your hand because it never wants you to have to think. Whereas this movie, like, will give bits of information and it'll skip other parts. Like, the one that gets me is the Mentats, The first time watching it, I didn't know. I had no idea. Everyone's like, "Oh yeah, the mentat." I'm like, "When's that mentioned?" They're like,
It's
"That's
not.
the neat part." It's not. It's just
Yeah.
the guy with the computer, and that's it. You don't need to know he's called a mentat because that doesn't serve any purpose besides, like, fans of the book would go, "Oh, I remember them from the book."
Well, no,
It's
we
like,
all get that Fallout reference too, right? We need
like,
that in our lives as well.
that's why when someone said mentats, I'm like, no, that's Fallout. You're getting your sci-fi's mixed up.
Yeah.
But like, you don't need to know what they are. All you need to know is there's these guys who are essentially like, sages or wizards. You don't even need to know that they're computers. You just know that they seem to have this almost supernatural ability to recall information.
Yeah.
And that works really well when Leo Atreides is like, "Hey, what's this?" And he's like, "Oh, don't worry, it's this." And oh, cool. What an interesting world. I'd love to learn more, but you don't have to. And that's kind of that sweet spot of
peak.
Yeah, giving you enough information to pique your interest, but never saturating it to the point where you're like, why am I still watching this? I could just Wikipedia page it.
And you're not like, how did he do that? How did he know them numbers?
I want to rant about the mentats, but I can do it later. Do you guys want the rant now?
Go for it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is touching on the second movie. Mentats do not appear in the second movie at all. Like, Thufir Hawat lives through the invasion. He lives into the second movie and serves the Harkonnens. He's a pretty big character in that. Like, not huge, but he's a character in that. And
sorry, wait, who are we talking about?
so that's the Atreides mentat, right?
The Atreides mentat,
the guy who's like, oh, I should have known that spy was there. I offer my resignation. And Leto's like, no, you deny us your brain in our time of need.
That's why I still know the name.
I don't know. I think the history of the mentats is actually really cool, and I am kind of bummed they don't touch on it, like, because
so
I think it. So I
what
think,
is the history exactly?
All right, so I think Frank Herbert did a really smart thing in he knew he wanted to write a book about politics and religion and leaders and the Messiah. Drugs and like ecology. There's other things that fit into that too, but he didn't want to write a story about technology. And I mean, in 1965, computers are kind of like not a thing, kind of slightly a thing. So what he did is he's like, the backstory for Dune is that 10,000 years ago, humanity was enslaved by a thinking computer, by an AI. And so
that's 2024 right there.
Nearly.
Oh, what a visionary.
So the humanity, like the universe rose up, destroyed the AI, and now there's a rule that there can be no thinking computers. And so that's why the mentats exist, right? They exist to fulfill the space that computers took up.
Yeah.
But he doesn't write himself into a corner having to talk about computers and how they work in this world. He just lets people be the computers. And it's simple, it's effective, you understand it straight away, and you don't risk dating yourself, because who knows what computers are going to be in 20 years, 30 years, 50 years, whatever. Like, I think that's really smart. And I just think they're a really cool concept, and they're a bigger part of the books than what Denis gives us. He has said himself it was the hardest thing he had to cut. Like, fans have gone through the trailers and found evidence of Thufir being in the second movie, but he was totally cut out. And he basically said this is a Bene Gesserit story and not a mentat story. Whereas you could have told this as a mentat story and not a Bene Gesserit story. Yeah,
I want to touch back on that. So, how would you have, like? Is there a way you see it working really, like, visually? I guess, or is it more like it would have been full of like exposition and almost.
No,
like,
and
TV.
I guess that's the end point I want to make. It's probably the right choice to cut him. Like, I think we get a lot more glimpses into the Bene Gesserit and how they work than what we get in the books, or at least the first book. And I think it fits the story a lot better. And like I said, it creates a more personal story. It's more personal to Paul's story. I mean, the other thing is that Paul was being secretly trained as a mentat. Like, he didn't realize that, but he had all these life paths he could have gone down. He could have been a mentat. He was getting trained by the Bene Gesserit to be the Kwisatz Haderach. Like, had all these paths to make him the man he is today. But all that gets cut, and I do think it's the right choice ultimately. Like, we can't spend several hours in these movies. We have to move on. There's other things that are cut too, but that was the big one that I wish we had more of, but I think it's the right choice to get rid of it.
Yeah.
Because the other big thing, not to go into all what was cut, but like, is the navigators or something,
yes,
right?
That's the other one that I kind of wish. And they don't appear in the book for very long. They just take this, because at the end of the second one, you know how all the other guilds come down?
Yeah.
That doesn't happen. It's just that the Space Guild is there, and they're very reliant on the spice for their navigators, and they have a lot of pull.
That's the most interesting choice, because all I knew about Dune before this really was like spice is this drug that lets people travel through space. And that was kind of like the premise I kept getting from people. Like, oh, okay, so it is big on like space travel and how the science of this drug would do it. And you're right, it is not mentioned at all. It is, I think they mentioned like I think they say spice is necessary for travel, and that's it. And it's like, cool.
Yeah.
And
And the first book doesn't even give you much more than that, to be honest. They do talk a bit about how like they're really deformed because they take so much spice. I did kind of want to see that because I thought that'd be sick, but anyway.
Maybe one day.
I think in part 3, I think we do. I feel like it's going in a pretty dark direction.
Maybe.
I wanted to... Sorry, Luke, your son.
No, you go.
Well, I wanted to ask the question you said before, like cutting out Mentats, making it a Bene Gesserit. Do you think this is more sci-fi or fantasy? Because it's just an interesting question that I have, because it is like a landmark science fiction book, but on this rewatch and then watching number 2, I'm like, I don't even know if I would call it sci-fi because of some of the and I wonder if that's why, if they've gone more of a Bene Gesserit Messiah path, it feels a lot more fantasy. Like
I don't disagree. I think you are right.
It's sci-fi.
Some of the more sci-fi concepts have been stripped away, like the Mentats, like the Guild Navigators. As a result, like I say, we get a more personal story. But if you consider sci-fi to be stories about technology and how it's going to affect people's lives, or the philosophy of how technology affects us, there's not much of that in here, right? Like, that's not what this story is about. And if you compare that to like an Asimov story or something like that, they're totally different. They're not even the same brand of like genre or anything.
That's what I mean. You put that next to like even something like Blade Runner, like they are to their entirely different mood. Like, they're not the same genre at all, which is an interesting thing, I guess. It doesn't make a difference. It's just an interesting point watching this where I'm like, I just wouldn't call it sci-fi. I'd put this in the fantasy section. I'd say this is a fantasy movie, but that's just this adaptation of it. So.
I know we need to move on to 2 because there's a lot to discuss, but I just wanted to. I love the scene in the first one with Leto like biting down on the 2 thing, just as like the Baron gets super close to him, and Baron taps his finger and he puts the shield on because he's just like, oh, even though this guy's like basically paralyzed, I just there's something fishy going on here, and it's just such a cool scene. And like then when they come in like hours later, everyone's dead, and like he's just like all covered up in the ceiling. It's like such a unique, like, oh my god, look at him! Like it's all it's so weird, but it's really cool.
Yeah.
What did you guys think of Dr. Yui, the man who betrayed them?
Traitor.
Like, I was so mad at him when I read the book. Like, I wanted to slap him across the galaxy. I hated him so much.
Baron just kills him.
Yeah, I know. And it was all for nothing.
Killed the wife.
It's one of those tropes that I brushed up against it badly this time, but I wonder if it wasn't a big trope back when this was written. But then, anytime anyone's like, "I've made a deal with our arch enemies to kill your entire family because they got to spare my family," I'm like, come on, no one thinks that, surely. Like, is anybody actually that dumb to be like, this mass murdering psychopath will spare me? Like, no.
And it's like literally like thousands and thousands and thousands of people die, and almost like an entire family die for his wife.
Yeah. Oh. It's one of those things. Like, I don't know the books, I can't compare, but it's like an easy story trope to fall back on. And I wonder if it's like, I don't know, maybe just like with Star Wars, it's the hero's journey, so there is a very clear blueprint of how to write this. I don't know if Frank Herbert was inspired by that in the same way Lucas was, but you can feel that, like with the messianic themes, a lot of the similar stuff. It's like I have no doubt that Frank Herbert was well aware of that and was probably taking some inspiration. And it's like it feels like a bit of an easy trope, but I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I remember really hating him in the book. He's a little bit more pathetic here, I guess. Like he's there's something that felt kind of evil about him in the book that's not really present here. But
no, that's the thing. He seems like a decent dude, like with Paul and everything like that.
Yeah. So I think from my memory, and I actually couldn't find any evidence of this, like he has a thing for Jessica, which is the other side of why he did what he did, because he thought he was going to have Jessica at the end of this, but
pick your wife or
Yes,
Jessica? Because you don't need to
Well,
work out.
I think the
Have
theory in the
both.
book is that he knew his wife was dead, and that was just the excuse he used so that he could sequester Jessica away. But I don't know. I tried looking this up after, and I can't even find any evidence of it. So maybe that's just my fan theory. I don't know.
Is it the same thing that he gives him, like the poison to put in his tooth?
Yeah.
It is? Okay, cool.
Yeah.
It does kind of disarm or it undermines the political intrigue a little bit when he comes in and he's like, this entire plan happens because I want to get my wife back. It's like that kind of feels a little bit like that old. I don't know, it feels a little bit weak compared to like the political machinations that are at play of like emperors trading houses and starting wars.
Yeah, and the Emperor sending his Sardaukar down secretly. Like, you're right. It's
To have
a
it been
little
just be
trite
like
compared to that.
Yeah, this one guy's like, I love my wife, so I'm going to kill everyone. That's no.
Like that thing, you almost would prefer it's like someone that's been there from the start of the movie and is actually just a double agent that's been like, that's actually like the Republic, like the Empire, but
yeah.
Yeah.
But we're not Frank Herbert.
No.
Duncan. Oh, yeah, you go.
Apologies for those brief technical difficulties. Where were we?
Duncan, Idaho.
Yeah.
Worst name.
Yeah.
That's cool performance. No, terrible. That's something that every time I think about this movie or I'm always like, I know he was doing a lot of drugs, but like, what kind of drugs? Because who has names like Leto Atreides, Stilgar, Gurney? And he's like, but Duncan, Idaho is the bad. I was like, what the hell is that?
And the hero is Paul. Like,
yeah. Also,
and his mum's name is Jessica. Like, I think the names are strange. I like some of them, but then Paul, I think, is really weak.
Yeah.
He spent like hours coming up with everyone's names, and by the end he's Paul, Jessica, Alan.
That's all I got. Did he spend like 2 weeks in Idaho? He's like, I love it there. I really need to get that in somehow.
Get a badass character out of this. Yeah.
It takes me out of it so much.
There's a Dunkin' Donuts in Idaho that he just like really, really loved, and he's like, I need to shout that out somehow.
Yeah. But Jason Momoa is really good, and it's sad that he's not in the. It's necessary, but it's sad he's not in the second.
Maybe he'll be in the third.
Maybe he will. All right.
How good's Batista?
Pretty good. He just feels he's the one that feels the most like Batista. I don't think he's got a lot to do. I can't think of his character's name, but he's pretty dull.
What is it? Beast or something? I don't know.
No, it's
Drax.
No, what's his neck? He's got a nickname. He's like something.
He's
Rabin
Harkonnen.
I was Rabin. I thought they gave him a nickname anyway. Yeah, like he is playing Batista's kind of. Like he's kind of playing himself, but I think that's meant to be. He's meant to be just a blunt instrument.
He's not his Blade Runner character. Like I feel like in that he's really different. But in this, every time he yells, all I can hear is Drax. Like it's plays against him a little bit there. Yeah,
he's commonly known as Beast Rabbit. You're all full of shit.
I never heard Beast in there.
I said his name's Beast, and he was like, "No, it's not." Anyway,
that's the animal, Batista.
That's X-Men, you idiot.
Let's move on. Part 2. Paul Atreides unites with Chani and the Freeman to seek revenge against the conspirators who destroyed his family.
Do you like the name the Freeman?
Freeman.
When
I was reading it, I kept calling them the Freeman. Man, this book was hard to read because how do you pronounce Bene Gesserit when you only read it like?
How did you pronounce it?
In my head, it was like Bene Gesserit or something like that, but it was like, it was hard. I struggled with it.
Well, maybe that's right. Maybe we've all been pronouncing it wrong this whole time.
No, I've been pronouncing it wrong this whole time, I think.
Are we sure?
Yes, we actually are.
Denis could be pronouncing it wrong.
No, we actually do know this.
We have recordings of him saying
It's a test to know if you're a real Dune fan to say how do you say this name, and I would have got it wrong because I'm not a true Dune fan.
Yeah, you're a poser.
Big poser.
Yes.
Yeah. 2 words. Holy shit. So here I was watching this in 70mm, like a Chad. And I hushed
wishing
cinema,
you were in IMAX.
It's not quite as good as IMAX, but whatever. And after 3 hours, the whole cinema just went, yeah, boy. Like watching this was like what watching Empire Strikes Back must have been. It was just that like this incredible penultimate showdown and like just epic. So much stuff is happening. Like loss and love, everything. Like it just feels big. Everything is big and just truly awesome in terms of it inspires awe. Like I was, there were scenes where I was just staring at the screen, like kind of slack jawed. Scenes where my heart's pumping, and I'm like, I know exactly how this is going to end. Paul's clearly not going to die. There's like, everyone knows this, but there are fight scenes where I'm like, holy crap, what happens? Just holy hell.
This film, is an epic. Like this film felt like a trilogy almost. Like I felt like it was this journey that I went on where at one point I looked at the time because we went to like a late session. And I looked at the time and I was like, oh, okay. It's only been an hour and 10. And I was like, okay, so I've still got another hour and a half left. And at that point I was kind of like, oh wow, it's only been an hour and 10. I thought maybe it had been longer, which would, propose that that's like a bad thing. But I was really excited when I realized there's still an hour and a half. And I was like, oh, thank God. Because Fade had just been introduced at that point. And I was like, is this setting up for a third film? I was like, I feel like we're coming to an end. What's going to happen? And I was like, okay, no, we got an hour and a half. I was like, man, we're going to get to the climax of this. I was like, this is really cool. And then like an hour and a half later, I remember looking at the time again and being like, oh shit, we only got 20 minutes left. I was like, I really don't want this to end. I was like, I really want more. And I feel like I've gone on this big emotional journey now. Like it's such an epic. I adore this film so much. So again, I know we've talked about so many visual things, especially when Fade is introduced on and it's all black and white, and there's just like so many cool shots of the army, the stadium, the gladiator pit thing, with like the white triangle in the middle of this like sea of black. It's just, oh man, I love this film so much.
I was reading about those scenes, like they shot them in infrared. Which is nutty. Like it's nutty.
Makes so much sense.
It's not like CGI. It's not color correction afterwards. Like they shot those scenes in infrared. I think those scenes will go down as like, some of the best scenes in sci-fi ever because they are truly amazing to look at, and yet it's just black and white. Like I don't know, there's something really special about it. The ink blotch fireworks that go off, like there's just like cool. Rorschach paintings in the sky.
It's just like I've never seen anything like that.
Yeah, it feels so alien.
Yeah,
it's so well
to come to a movie like at this, this time in history, in my cynical, bitter years, and be like, and just to be like, wow, you can still do something new. You can still show something that hasn't been shown before. I can still be like, just enraptured by it. Is like a really special feeling. I don't want to sound like cheesy, but that is like this is the magic of movies. This is why we do this stuff because like to have that happen is like holy crap. Yeah, how are you doing this? Like, I've been taken to this whole new world. And the infrared makes so much sense. Like, I remember there's a scene in Sicario where he films it in infrared for like 20 minutes. And so Denis, he knows how it works. And that explains why it feels so almost clunky, but like, because it feels a bit more jarring than CG would.
Yes.
Which is what makes you be like, but it doesn't feel fake jarring. It's such a unique thing to be like, I feel like I'm kind of witnessing something on a different planet.
Like the way it looks makes his mouth like all black and like there's so many things about it that are jarring, but it works so well.
Yeah.
It felt out of this world, but it also felt old. Like it felt like, oh, this is like old film equipment that they've used to like, it felt like really early days film equipment where it just felt flawed and like, it was really cool.
Well, there's like the parade scene, which is like super clearly, like it looks exactly like Nazi propaganda, right? Like if you've ever seen any Nazi parades, it's like, oh, this is what we're watching right now. Like, it works really well for calling back to that as well.
Yeah.
And then you've got the Bene Gesserit, Silence from Death Stranding. Like, what's her name? What's the actress's name?
Léa Seydoux.
Léa Seydoux.
She's got like the goggles, and they've just got that bit of blue at the bottom, and for some reason that just like popped really. I don't know. There's something about it that was really cool. I really enjoyed that.
Because what's so interesting is then you get that one scene where it's all infrared and it's like I'm in this bizarre world, but then you realize when they're inside, okay, it's actually not. That's just when they're in the sun. They're not like all weird black and white creatures.
Yeah,
it's just the light they live in.
Yeah,
because then they go inside and you see their skin color. Okay, so and that's just that is again one of those moments of like it tells a story in like one image.
Yeah.
So it's whenever they go outside, they're in this completely sort of like black and white universe. How would that affect a whole race of like a civilization? And that's like that would probably make you be very black and white and very bland, and like there's no nuance in their entire society, and that's because every part of their world is like that. So the color, like it's just a fascinating bit of world building. That's not just like here's a lazy technique that I can put on to make it seem interesting. It's like no, it's in the sun because it's a black sun. It's reversed, but they're still normal humans. Sort of. It's fascinating.
Yep.
It's just very pale. I really liked Austin Butler as Fade. It was tripping me out where I know Austin Butler as in I haven't watched too much stuff with him, but I know like he's Elvis and Scott super into that role and all that sort of stuff. And I honestly spent like the last hour of this movie being like, who is that? I was like, he looks so familiar. And I was like, I feel like it's a Skarsgård. And I was like, but it's not. I was like, it's throwing me. And I was like, but his voice, I was like, no, it's 100% a Skarsgård.
Yeah.
Because listen to him. I was like, that's Stellan's son. And it's not. It's Austin Butler. I was like, holy shit.
That's, because he's one of those new actors that I was talking about, like the actor of the generation. After Elvis, after Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, it's like he is the hot new thing.
Yep.
Yeah.
But yeah, I had the same thought. Like he mastered Stellan Skarsgård's accent. Like he does sound like his son. I'm like, he
really does.
That's baller. That's the best way to do it. Like he loses himself in it. He becomes freaky as shit.
Yeah, yeah. Like he's not an ugly guy, but man, he's freaky looking in this. Like put some forehead prosthetics on him, shave his eyebrows, and you got yourself a soup. Like he's haunting and he's like terrifying looking. I don't know. Yeah, his character was really good. Again, like standout performances across the board in my opinion.
Yeah. Because he's got the magnetic presence that you just constantly want to see. You just want to watch him and just
Yeah. On the other side, like Javier Bardem, like I really enjoyed him as Stilgar. Like he brought some really needed humor, I think, because like it's a pretty dry book. The first movie's not particularly funny. Like it has a few moments here. Duncan Idaho is probably the most, like lighthearted character. That's the word I'm looking for. But like Stilgar, and like he's an interesting character even outside of that. In like his descent into belief in the Messiah, but like even at first, like he's so humble, just like the Marty would be. Like it's so good. Part.
He's like whispering it to his friends, like he's like he doesn't know this, which is exactly what he would say. Yeah. And he's just like he's so hyped. He's like, oh my god, guys, this is it. This is happening. It's like and just every time it cuts to him when he's watching him do something, he's just like, he's like just as it would be.
It's good, and he's got like because he has, Bardem like has like that tired old face, and so when he starts to get excited, you're like, this feels like an old man who's like rediscovering meaning in life, and that's just fun. And it's great because the tone of this movie is really self-serious in a good way. Like it's not a Marvel film. They're not winking. They're not making quips. They're not all like, oh, we're on the way to save the world.
Yeah. Yep.
And so it doesn't have a lot of humor, but when it comes up like diegetically with Harvey Bardem, it's like that's so perfect because it's enough. It's not too much that it's annoying.
Doesn't feel out of place. No, exactly. Like this character has this trait that's humorous. It's
exactly. It feels appropriate, and it really leaves the mood when it needs to. It's so good.
And that's the thing. I think, especially when you compare like him at the end of the first one, where he's very like. He's probably this guy who's been a believer for a long time and has probably given up. So he's just like, I'm a survivor. He's like very just kind of just down and just like, soft spoken and just like, no, this is the way it is, blah, blah, blah. Let's go.
Yeah.
And then to see him like be so excited by Paul Atreides like throughout the whole movie, it's really good. And like to watch him follow him and be like, yeah, it's great.
Yeah. The speaking of again like just visuals and stuff that was wow. Kind of the whole first hour has just got some incredibly good stuff like the raids that they do, like where they have to take out a helicopter. And just like it's like you see some of these essentially their crawlers just like in Star Wars, but like just them
the guerrilla warfare to take
the guerrilla warfare like just these gigantic things. There's like the scene where there's these bombs and they're just like sheets of metal.
Yep.
And they're kind of like magnets. And you're like, what is that? And then it sticks to it. And you're like, oh, it's like a magnet bomb. That's such an interesting idea.
Yeah.
And then you get like the sandworm. The riding the sandworm, which is just like, holy shit.
Yeah, that scene. That scene is like when he's falling down between the dune, and it's like you can't see what's happening. It's very obscured. I'm like holding my breath. Even like I know what happens, but I'm like, holy shit! Like he's not gonna die here, obviously. But this is breathtaking. Like this scene is amazing. And then again, visual storytelling. The book goes into great detail about how this is how they control the sandworms. They pull on the plates, which exposes their soft, their breathing holes or whatever. So they have to try and keep those out of the sand, and that's how they move them. And Denis just shows you that happening, and it works really well. And you don't need a detailed explanation. It's like, okay, I can understand how they can ride these things now.
Yeah.
Let's go with it. Like, it works really well. We don't need a long-winded explanation. It's really well done.
100%.
I really like Paul's journey and just like the turn almost that he takes when he like follows this path, and even though he doesn't believe in it and he's fighting against it for the most part, but when he finally does, and just seeing like I think his mum, like Jessica, which is Rebecca Ferguson, is that correct? Yep. Does an awesome job in this at being this like she straight up is a villain. Like she's manipulating these people, and like just doing it in a very, very evil way. And then it's great.
Yeah, there's a scene where she's walking around talking to the fetus, which was fucking weird in the book. I didn't know how they were going to do it here. It's still weird, but she's talking to the fetus. Weird, and everybody has said that to me. It's like, it's not that weird. I'm like, it's weird. What is wrong with you people? It wasn't
jarring to watch. Kona, what did you think?
It's like, it's very creepy. Like, it's the kind of thing that if you saw somebody doing in real life, you'd be like, this person's on meth or something, or I don't know, possessed by the devil.
The thing for me is it reminded me a lot of Twilight with the baby at the end, because she kind of communicates with it, and then spoilers, when the baby is born, it's born as like a 30-year-old woman because it has all these memories and can talk.
That's pretty wild.
It's born as Anna Taylor-Joy.
Yeah, basically.
Right.
I mean, it's the size of a baby, but it has the intelligence of an older person, just like that stupid baby in Twilight. I'm glad, and I'm so glad they didn't go that path here, because I'm going to spoil it, but in the book, the person that kills the Baron is his 2-year-old baby sister. Like, it's fucking stupid. And I'm so glad he didn't go that path. It's such a more personal element to have Paul go and stick the knife in his neck and be like, "Here you go, Grandpa." Like,
yeah.
Oh, when he says grandfather, and Stellan just like stares at him, it's like such a great reaction. Like,
turning on his father, much like a certain Skywalker did to another Skywalker. Yeah, this movie really does rip off Star Wars.
It does, doesn't it?
I was reading about the differences, like even things like there's a whole subplot. There's like Paul has a kid in the book.
I think the kid,
who dies in the Siege raid. Like,
and it's super interesting. They just cut it out, and I sort of wondered that. I'm like, is that a better choice? I don't know, but
I think so.
The thing that sorry, if I'm talking about the book too much, just tell me, because I hate being that guy. Like, actually, in the book, but I like to be that guy, and I shouldn't be. Like, Chani's not much of a character in the book, right? Like, she's kind of just along for the ride. She doesn't have this disagreement with the path that Paul's going down. At the end, like, she's disappointed that he's marrying Irulan, the princess.
She gets it.
But she gets it, and also there's the mirror between his dad and Jessica. She was his concubine, not his wife. But in this, like, she rebels, and I don't know how they're going to reconcile those two if there is a third, which is why I say maybe there won't be a third movie, because like Chani and Paul are in a very different place to how the book ends.
Yeah.
But it's a good choice, because Chani is like a 2-dimensional character or a 3-dimensional character. Like, she's not just this woman that tags along. And same with Jessica. Jessica does not much in the books. Like, she becomes the Reverend Mother, but in here she's like conniving and working towards, like, in the books it feels like they just have to do this to survive. This is what they have to do to survive. This is what they have to do to fit in. But in the movie it's like, no, she's conniving. She's trying to play out this prophecy to convince, let's convince the weaker ones. That's how we get in.
Yeah,
like, there's none of that stuff in the book.
Yeah. Chani, I think it's a really smart choice with Chani, because it basically, like, she becomes the emotional center. And like the movie ends on her fleeing. And I think it's pretty interesting to be like, that is actually where this emotion lays on. Like you were saying before, the first one makes it about Paul's journey. Like, it constantly grounds it in this emotional relationship. which is a really good choice. And I think Zendaya is really good in this, and their whole relationship is really feels really earned and feels pretty kind of cliche, but at the same time still genuine. And so I think having her as like a bigger part is a really good choice because it just makes you invested. It emotionally invests you in his story a lot more than because it's really easy with like messianic prophecy stories to just get lost in the grandeur and be like, this guy is Jesus come again, and isn't that amazing? And that's really easy to just get lost and be like, yeah, who cares? But by constantly having Chani there and having that get lost because they have to like the directions it took by being like he's going to leave her for Princess Aurelian to save the world, but also go to war with the world is like that's pretty fascinating, and it comes at a real cost. And so I'm totally invested in this because there are stakes to power and there are stakes to becoming the Messiah, and like power has sacrifice. Whereas if Chani wasn't a big character, it would have been pretty just like okay, he's just doing God stuff. Like yeah.
And like that's how I felt with the book. Like I didn't like I could see you can see his visions and where it's headed, but I didn't feel like Paul was necessarily a bad guy. But he's not, he's not the protagonist he's made out to be at the start, right? Like he's bringing destruction to the world in a lot of ways. But this story really drove that home better, and like part of the reason Frank Herbert wrote sequels to the book is because he felt like he was too subtle with the original one. And I think Denny has made good on that in a lot of ways. Like it's not subtle that you shouldn't blindly trust a leader, whether they're the Messiah or just someone who's really charismatic, right? Like, yeah.
I wanted to like touch on that, like the legacy of this whole run, like the white savior stuff, because it's an elephant in the room. I feel in 2024. There are some scenes in this, especially where Timothy comes into a cave full of like, cowering people of color who are clearly like Middle Eastern inspired. And it's like, he is the only one who will save them. Because like all those things you mentioned about Denis kind of making it explicit, like this is bad. And it's like, I read it almost as there's like this interesting intertextual condemnation of the narrative, but also like accepting, or not accepting, but like being like, sometimes these things happen not because of color or race, but because of power dynamics. I don't know. I guess did you guys think anything of that? Did you brush up against that at all? Or?
The thing I think it's very clear with Timothy Chalamet walking into the cave, and like especially in this day and age, you can see it like that. But I feel like with this story and the way it's laid out of like with Jessica's manipulation and stuff like that, it makes sense for it to feel that way. It should feel a little wrong. Like I feel like it works for it, where it's like this feels wrong. This feels like they're taking advantage of this, and it feels like this shouldn't be happening. Like they're using them and steering them away from what their end goal should be, basically, for their own battles. But yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right. Like I don't know. I have seen readings on that of like, oh, this is just another white savior story. Like, we don't need this in 2024. Cancel Frank Herbert. But I don't know. Like, it's handled a lot better here. Like Denny has there's a bit of a deft touch with it, and I think you're right. Like it's obvious. Like you should feel uncomfortable about it because it is. They are taking advantage of these people, but to the same degree, like. I don't know. Paul is working for the Fremen, right? Like,
yeah.
You can't. He's giving them. He's fulfilling their prophecy, which, whether it was implanted by the Bene Gesserit or not, there are other things that don't get covered here that are covered in the book. Where, like, how they're storing that water underground, and he talks about how it's the sacred water, and we would die of thirst before drinking it. Like, that's part of their ecology plan to like turn Arrakis into a paradise. And Paul actually is like spearheads that and fast forwards it by generations in the book. Like he is actually, and so part of it is like it's a perspective thing. Like if you're a Fremen, Paul's doing good things. If you're one of these one of the other houses that's being taken over by the jihad, you're not okay with this.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I'm firmly on the side of like you got to take all things in context, and like writing in the '60s was very different to now, so you can't hold anyone to standards of a different time. But yeah, I think there's an interesting like it's not just like a literal white savior of only he as a white guy can come in and do it. And like there is an interesting nuanced look at how and why this kind of prophecy could come into play because, like you say, it's being controlled by this religious group. And it's like, well, when there's people of power, the people in power are usually the ones who can enact change. And if they're colonizers, then they're going to be the white savior, quote unquote. And it's like, it's interesting. I thought it was really fascinating how he kind of doesn't directly address it, but clearly is sort of making points about that and like layers on more of the nuance of this is a really sort of this whole plan and this whole prophecy is kind of insidious and it's going to come at a cost to somebody no matter what.
Yeah.
And there's no, even if the prophecy comes true, it's going to be paid, like there's going to be bloodshed. And that's fascinating.
Yeah.
And that's why I feel like it probably works more that Chani does go against him and isn't just feeding him grapes and giving him foot massages on his throne, with his new wife. Like, she does fight against it, and I feel like that just adds to it. So,
yeah.
No, I agree. I think she's a much more three-dimensional character in the movie. Same with Jessica. Like, neither of them have a whole lot of agency in the book. Jessica's kind of just following the prophecy, following the Bene Gesserit path. Chani's just following Paul along in a lot of ways. And like I said, it's not a very personal story like the book. But here we get those personal relationships. They're brought to the forefront, and I think it works fantastically. Like, yeah.
Conan.
Yep.
What's your opinion on Christopher Walken in this? You can do it in his voice if you want.
Christopher Walken is such an actor. I
couldn't even tell it was him. Like with his voice too. I was like, man, who is this actor? Yeah. He looks just like Christopher Walken.
This new superstar? No, I think he's great. Like, but I think it's one of the things. I think he's just doing himself, and that's kind of. This comes back to my point of all these great actors kind of just bringing their star power and not doing anything different is really interesting. Like Zendaya is speaking like a 20-year-old in 2024, right? Like she doesn't have an accent. She doesn't have anything. There's no inflections, no choices. Whereas some of the Fremen literally speak like different languages. She speaks English in a in a modern American accent, which is an interesting choice. Josh Brolin just talks normally. Stellan Skarsgård's doing Skarsgård, and Christopher Walken is doing Christopher Walken. Like that's not sometimes that can be a bad thing, but again, I think just by having great actors do it, and just in this movie that is kind of so larger than life and so kind of just awe-inspiring. I don't know. It works for me. I can see people. I can imagine some people would kind of brush up against it. But to me, when he comes out and talks Christopher Walken's voice, I'm like, yeah, that's right. That's why you hire him. You don't hire him for anything else but that.
Yeah.
But do you feel like in that, and I didn't mind it. I brought it up with Grant after the movie because
you hate it.
No, because I love Christopher Walken, but like there isn't a part of me, and I wonder how many people you said you just did it who are watching that scene and when he's talking, and he does his voice, and you're like, okay, he's doing his voice, like he's just straight up Christopher Walken.
Yep.
Should we have that thought watching a movie when we're meant to be carried away by it? Should it be like, oh, Christopher Walken's doing Christopher Walken's voice, or is that in actuality taken away from it then because you've had that thought?
That is a great question, and it's a fantastic question. I think sometimes, like, it depends on the movie, because you're right. Sometimes, probably more often than not, I'm a big stickler for being like, I should never be taken out of the movie. I should never be disturbed from the reality it's trying to tell. I think in the case of this, though, and some other movies, part of the content, part of the language of these movies is the process behind it. So I've spoken, at length about how all great movies are about movie making, and this isn't quite the same. But I think part of like when you watch this, I think you're meant to almost be like, how the hell is this being made? How the hell are they doing that? How are these special effects being done? How did they make how do they make the planet Harkonnen look this way?
Yeah.
Like, how did they afford every good actor in the world to come into the desert? Like, I think I think Denis his intention is to make you think, I don't know how he's done this, but they've created a world that feels real.
Yeah.
And so I think even if you wasn't the actors, I think even looking at any of those parts and being like, how are they using these effects? How are they doing that? That kind of takes you out of the world, right? Because you're like, I know this isn't real, so I want to know the mechanics behind it.
Mm.
And to me, in a movie like this, where so much of the achievement and the success of, so much of the success is in just the achievement of it being such a polished product. Having actors turn up, like having Anya Taylor-Joy turn up for one scene, so I can, Leo point at the screen, is like, that's part of it. To be like, holy crap, this movie is important because it has every big actor. This movie matters because she took that scene. She took one, she obviously took this job for one scene, whether or not she gets more screen time in the later films. Christopher Walken turns up, like, he's got a big legacy. He's important to a lot of people.
Yeah.
So that's a long rambling way to say, yes, it took me out of it, but so much of the movie is designed to be taken out of, because you're meant to be like, how have they grown sandworms on planet Earth and filmed this? You shouldn't be able to make that, but somehow they did. They've created deserts that have magic in them. Like, yeah.
Okay. True.
It took you out of it. You didn't like seeing him?
No. Like, I had that thought though, where I was like, I was waiting for him to talk, and then when he talked like that, and every time there was like the Walken inflection, I kind of chuckled. Where I was like, oh, I chuckled,
Yeah.
And I don't mind that. I because it is. We're watching a sci-fi, and it's like with this huge cast, and it's like we're having fun. I'm like, this is cool. We've now got Christopher Walken, so I get it from that perspective. But I do just have the thing where I'm like, oh, I don't see him as that character. Then I see him as Christopher Walken playing that character. Where you said that about Batista earlier, and I get that because it is just Batista yelling. But I still saw that character as the Baron's nephew. Like, as much as Batista's yelling as he is, Batista playing his character, but I see that Batista as different than other Batista characters. Well, I saw Christopher Walken in a gown. You know what I mean?
But I think like the Emperor isn't a character in this. He's a presence in the he's a presence in the first one. You only hear him mentioned, and most of his scenes in this, you just see it's him walking around his nice palace planet.
Yeah,
and there's like 3 or 4 lines, and the only times it matters is you get a couple of lines, and then at the very end where he has to kiss the ring.
Should have been Palpatine, the actor that played Palpatine.
Like that would have also been a pretty interesting choice, though, right?
Yeah.
Like,
if he wasn't doing the Palpatine voice and it's just his normal voice, you'd kind of be like,
but like there's something to that. You bring that element. So I think by having Walken, that brings that extra layer of presence. Like, oh, okay, we are in the presence of gods. We are in the presence of an emperor of the industry. Like, that brings, at least to me, that brings an extra awareness of like, this guy's important. He is kind of the emperor in this weird roundabout way. That's a good segue though. Like, that is a problem that I can easily see people getting hung up on. And like, this movie does have problems. I want to just pin this. This isn't a perfect movie. There are definitely issues with it.
If you think there's problems, name them all. Come on.
All right. Number 1, last battle is a little bit short.
Like the actual battle or the knife fight?
My big issue is pacing, all right? This movie has some whack-ass pacing. So there are parts where I don't know if you guys found this. I found, especially in the middle sort of third, I had no idea how much time was passing, no idea exactly what was like. No idea sort of how steps that were being taken, time that was passing, and as a result, what was sort of going in between them. Like, some characters would make choices that are like, okay, you must have done something in between this that I haven't seen, because that seems a little bit out of character for you.
Yeah,
like,
I agree. I think it gets a little lost in the middle.
Yeah.
Lost in its way. And I mean, the book's like that too. Like, that's where it starts to wax philosophical and talk about ecology and all this stuff. But like, you're right, there's some strange choices, like when the siege gets destroyed and there's that spy left behind, but they were just talking to her like one scene before.
Yes.
She seemed like one of the main crew, and now all of a sudden she's left behind and she's going to get brutally murdered by Fade. Like, how did that come to be? Why is she the one that's there? We don't get any explanation. We won't, but...
No, and like, you can infer, okay, they've probably been doing these raids for a long time. There's clearly a lot of just surviving in the desert and guerrilla warfare. But then things like when he drinks the water of life, he drinks it, has a dream, and the next scene they wake him up. Okay, this must be like 10 minutes later.
Yeah.
But I know in the book that's like months or something.
Yeah, it's a while.
And so there's this sense of like it completely skips over that time where stuff has happened in verse. And so then he wakes up, he's like, cool, I'm ready to go crusade and kill everybody. I'm like, a lot of stuff has happened here, but it doesn't dig into that. And that
Yeah. Fade coming to power, and then immediately like he's destroying a siege, and like the tables have turned again somehow, like very, very quickly.
Yeah.
But like that doesn't make that much sense.
No, exactly right. Like Luke, do you agree, disagree?
Like I get that, and it's probably why, like I said earlier, there was an hour and 10 into this movie, and I was like, I feel like this has been going for a while, and then the next hour and 20 felt like it flew by, where I was like, oh shit,
Yeah.
okay, I'm trying to catch up, like what's going on? And it did kind of feel like, okay, now Fade's come in and he's kicked Batista out, and he's actually doing good. He's because he's doing it with force and like oppression, and he's like, okay, cool, he's made a difference. All right, now they've fought back and they've actually taken over him. It didn't feel like Fade was this threat that had actually, smashed the Freeman back, like the Freeman back, or anything like that. It felt like he'd just gotten there when the uprising then happens back at him, sort of thing. So,
do you think Fade's an unnecessary character? Like, could you swap Rabin or whatever his name is? Could you swap Batista and Fade and have that different of a movie? Because I felt this in the book, and I kind of feel it now. Like, they kind of introduced Fade at a weird spot, and I think he feels pretty unnecessary to me.
I see that. Like, I think you could 100% do the same thing. I'm glad they have Fade in, because I think he's a great actor. I think he did really well. And
get rid of Batista and just have Fade. Like,
yeah, I don't know, but
yeah,
I like the inclusion of him, and that final fight I really enjoyed. That
I don't think you have to get rid of any of those things.
Been there since the start in the first movie. Was introduced in the first movie. That probably feels like a bigger fight than where it's like, oh my god, they're finally meeting and having this fight. Instead of Fade was introduced an hour ago.
Yep.
He's not gonna. But even though I still felt like I was like, oh my god, is Paul gonna die? I was like, I don't know what's gonna happen. So
I think it adds to kind of the political intrigue element of the story, though, of like, families' powers rising, falling. One member can't do it, so another comes in and. I do feel like there is a 4-5 hour cut of this movie somewhere.
Yes.
And like that's why the pacing's a bit off, because there is clearly like, I think Warner Brothers would have been very adamant, like, we need this under 3 hours. That's why it comes in 2:45, because it feels like it is a 3.5 movie at least, if not more. And so I reckon there's a lot of that. And like in that universe where you get a 5-hour cut, I think there is more development of Fade, of the Harkonnen dynamic, of kind of Beast. He doesn't need a redemption arc, but Beast just being kind of like, I don't know, what does this mean? I'm completely useless now. There's an interesting exploration there. So thematically, I think it really works, having this family just kind of, the power completely destroys this family, because he's just like, no, you're useless, so now your nephew's going to take over the role. But you are right, like in the version of the story being told, you could very much just have Fade as the whole villain, and it works.
That's the thing. I like Rabin, in that scene. He's just like this brute force. It's just like, I'm angry and coming in. And then like when they start getting picked off, he's like, he gets scared and he's like starts turning back and running away from him. And then even the final battle, he goes to flee again, because he's like, oh god, I'm out of my element here.
Yeah, he's a real coward, isn't he?
And it's like the battle with Gurney's so good, because he's like, look who's come back. And he just gets killed. He's like, he gets
back straight away. He's like, so cool.
It's not even a fight. He just gets got. So.
Yeah.
And so that's the thing, though. But speaking on Fade, like they go into that whole thing where you're talking about where it's that like that the last season of Game of Thrones, where it's like we're gonna do this plan, and it would take 6 months to travel there. But okay, the next scene we're there and we've done it.
Yeah.
Like it's that, because Fade, they're talking about he meets Lea Seydoux. And she like they go into the room together, and then like
she's like, okay, seed.
I'm pregnant with him, and like, okay, good. His weakness is
and it's a girl. It's a girl, because I can control it.
It's the magic of the dance.
And they're like, okay, his weakness is like his sex drive. So we can use that to advantage. Oh wait, no, he can't, because he's dead, and there's never a scene with him interacting with us again. It's like there's no political intrigue then of them using that to persuade him. It's just, okay, no, he's going to fight and die. So
And so yeah, all of these are problems that I say are like there are issues with the movie. It's not perfect, but in the version of the story being told, like they're all sort of sacrificed in pursuit of momentum, right?
Yeah.
And like you said, Luke, you'd never. But I was the same. I was consciously aware that it's a 3 hour movie, but I was like, I don't want to look at my watch because I kind of don't want this to end. I want to just think that it's got more to go because it just keeps going. Even it's just got incredible narrative propulsion, and that's kind of what you need in an epic like this, especially like because it is exciting and it's just exhilarating. And so I wanted to ask, do you guys think this would be better as a TV show, right? Like as a HBO, it's 2021. HBO is like, we are releasing season 1 of Dune. It's 10 episodes, like Game of Thrones was. Do you think that's better or worse?
I have a hot take.
Mm-hmm.
I think this would do really good as a book. No.
We've had Grotto explaining it wouldn't do well.
Oh,
as a
sure.
book, right?
Oh, yeah. A HBO series, 100% I'll be down for. And I feel like it would address those issues of like, you don't get final season of Game of Thrones, you get first season of Game of Thrones, where it does flesh them out more. You can have a couple episodes where it's just based on the navigators. I like what we got. I like these movies. I love having these movies. I wouldn't mind seeing it fleshed out in a show, but yeah.
I think there is a place for a show to do that, but I don't think it's telling this story. I think you lose somewhat. No matter how big the budget for the show is, it's never going to be you're never going to get the scenes that we get here of like them destroying the crawlers, like the palace that comes down out of the sky at the end, and they like there's just so many big like it's an epic, and I don't think it will feel like as epic as Game of Thrones feels. You still know that you only see the direwolves like twice a season. The dragon only shows up for 5 minutes for the whole season.
That's their budget
because it's
for the
freaking
season.
Expensive to do that stuff, and they can't do it all the time. You do lose things doing that, and I think this movie would lose a lot.
You don't get Christopher Walken in no TV show.
No,
Probably
you wouldn't get Christopher Walken until he turns up.
You're walking out of there
in the episode 9. Anyway, yeah, I think that's right. You get a vastly like. Because I think what you'd get as well is you get every episode you'd have one of those things. You'd have like you get the sandworm ride episode. Yeah. It's like, oh, that's when that happens, and the whole thing would be around that, building up to it.
Yeah, and here's the crawler guerrilla warfare episode.
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly. And you get this kind of broken, disjointed thing, which there is a universe where you get a different version that sort of tells that story that really fleshes out everything, like you said, the Mentats, the Navigators.
Yeah.
Really dig deep into the political intrigue and the Bene Gesserit conspiracies. But yeah, this version of the story where it cuts elements out and just creates like an incredibly exciting, enthralling, epic thing is only possible in movies.
Yeah, I think so.
And there's something to that. Like that's the thing. For some reason, it's weird, and I know that's definitely different quality. But like me picturing it in a show as my head when you were talking about that, where it's like, okay, this episode is the guerrilla warfare one where they take out the walkers, and I'm like, all of a sudden I was picturing Mandalorian, and I was like, I feel like now this show would feel like Mandalorian. It'd have a cheaper budget. It'd be like, okay, now we've got the season with the Sarlacc, or like the episode of the Sarlacc, and it's like, oh, okay. And that's the thing. There's a magic to this movie that made me not stop thinking about it. Since I watched it, where it is that epic, and it is like you need it on a big screen, or to have just a 3 hour session where it's like I'm dipping my toe into this world for 3 hours, and it's like, wow, that was cool. I can't wait for another 3 years for the next to dip my foot into the pool again, sort of thing. So yeah.
I just thought it was an interesting conundrum because in my mind I'm like, it can't be a perfect movie because you can't do this story in perfect form, but it's the most perfect version we could get. It's this
adaptation.
It's this weird exercise in my mind where I'm like, I want to rate it 5 stars, but I just can't because there's too many problems. But those problems are necessary.
It's better pop up as a 5-star on your letterbox. I'm telling you.
I know I'm a dirty hypocrite. But what do you guys think of? I want to compare this to like Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, and Avatar.
What do you want us to rate them? What do you want us to
I just made a note to myself compare to them because they're all pretty similar, I feel. Like Avatar is almost I didn't think of the Avatar comparison initially, but then I did. And I was like, oh yeah, there is a lot of similarities, like real spectacle fest.
Yeah.
A lot of ecological commentary, colonialism.
Yeah.
I don't know. Where do you think this fits into the pantheon, I guess, of like big budget special epic stuff?
For me, I think like comparing it to Avatar, this movie has a much more, it has a deeper story to tell. Like the themes are more interesting, the characters have a lot more facets, the end message is a lot more grey, if you will. Like it's not, there's a very clear like good guy bad guy in both Avatar movies. There's no grey area there. Whereas this, it's like Paul's the hero, but he's not. Like this is what he's, the path he's going down. I can't follow him on. Like this, I don't know. It's such a more interesting story than what I think we get in Avatar. You're right.
I was just gonna say, Avatar is the Marvel version of
maybe,
Dune.
yeah.
Like literally, like the white savior is actually really good, and Jake Sully comes in and saves the day, and it's not nuanced at all, and it smacks you over the head of like, oh, they're destroying nature. It's very like corporations are evil. This is for adults and real men.
This is for grown-ups.
Sorry, Jim Cameron, Big Jim. But
do you reckon this will be anywhere near the success of Avatar?
No.
It did get a little bit of the like. There's definitely the the matinee audience, the people who read this when they were kids, the same people who love Jim Cameron for some reason. I actually never understood why people just adore Jim Cameron even though they're going to matinees. I don't.
No, me neither. But I think you're right. Like, the older audience. Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I think 30 years from now, these films are remembered better than Avatar. I know Avatar 1 was big, but I think by the time it gets to Avatar 6, it's not going to feel special.
Avatar
I don't
6
even
is
think
come out
it
in
feels
30
special.
years, though. So
Yeah, I know.
But
It will
be directed by Jim Cameron's head in a jar.
That's the Avatar is not. I don't feel like Avatar's an epic.
No, I think Avatar is totally an epic. I just don't think it doesn't have the same story as this. Star Wars, I think, is this for I don't want to say for kids because I freaking love Star Wars, but like again, there's the spectacle, but I don't think the message is as deep, if you will.
It's a good comparison. Like it's an interesting, I guess, comparison. Yeah, like Star Wars is kind of this for kids, not even in a prerogative way. Sorry, but pejorative is the word. It's like prerogative is a word, but it's not what I meant to say. I don't mean in a pejorative sense. Yeah. It's because yes, this movie is like I said. I was really surprised how 2 ended. Where I'm like, this actually got a lot darker than I thought, and there is a lot. It's a lot kind of weirder. Like the talking with a fetus, the very clear like religious overtones of like this is going to lead to genocides.
Yeah.
And like just weird stuff happening, whereas Star Wars is very kind of sanitary by comparison. It's like you've got an empire that shoots lasers and kills people, but you never see anything. It's just there's very clear good, bad, and never the twain shall meet. Whereas this is like everything. The universe and power kind of corrupts everybody.
And it's like Star Wars' dark middle chapter is Han Solo's captured by Darth Vader.
Yeah.
Like, like what will Luke do next time? He lost a hand. And this one's like, your good guy Paul is going to genocide everybody. So, yeah.
That's exactly right. Yeah, it's like, tune in next time to see how Han Solo escapes. Whereas this one's like, oh, okay, we're all going to...
Tune in next time to see the jihad. Like, yeah.
Yeah.
Did you like anybody? They're all going to die soon.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. It is fascinating watching this. Just so many scenes. I was like, "Holy crap!" That is just like George Lucas just read this book and was like, "I like that. I like that. I like that."
I'm not into Middle Eastern religion, so I'm going to go with Eastern religion. I'm not I like swords more than knives, so I'm going to go with that.
And I'm going to make them lasers.
Yeah, but lasers
like lasers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lord of the Rings is an interesting comparison, and I don't know what to do with it.
Lord of the Rings is better.
As an adaptation, Lord of the Rings is weaker because they cut Scouring of the Shire when they should have kept it. Whereas this,
they shouldn't have.
The things they changed, they changed in this are for the better, and I don't agree that that's the case with Lord of the Rings.
Yeah,
not in all cases.
They shouldn't have kept. No. Because
Scaring the Shire is so important to the Hobbit story. It's unbelievable
know,
that
I
Peter
know.
Jackson doesn't feel that way.
no, it's too much. It's too much at the end of the journey. It's too much.
No, I disagree.
It takes it.
No, we're not litigating
Yeah,
Lord of the Rings. You can have a different opinion, state it, but we're not litigating it.
Okay. That's fine.
Yeah, they are, because those two are probably the more similar comparisons. Like, they're both based off very revered books.
Yeah.
They are contain movie adaptations by guys who clearly love the source material.
Yep.
So if they make Dune 3, I'm super excited to see what is that. Yeah, Return of the King or.
And there's stuff that were considered unfilmable until they were done.
Yeah.
Like in this style, we had bad Lord of the Rings adaptations and we had bad Dune ones.
Yep.
I feel like those two, like without my bias of Lord of the Rings, but like I honestly feel like that and this are the best adaptations of books we've gotten into movies. Maybe Twilight, but like
there's lots of adaptations out there though, right? Like Gone Girl or something like that. Like you could
Yeah.
list them all day long, and they're smaller productions, but they probably are more true to the source material. It's hard, it's a hard thing to say, but I agree with you, Luke. I think of like the big budget epic adaptations, I think these are the two to beat.
Yeah. Like, I think it'll be interesting to see if this becomes the Lord of the Rings of the next generation, right? Like, our generation grew up with Lord of the Rings being very important and, like, it reshaped nerd culture. Like, it reshaped modern culture as nerd culture.
Yeah.
And so it'd be interesting to see what this does and if this becomes kind of the... Like, I know my sister took my nephew to this and he loved it and he's into it. And I think he's probably he's gotten into sci-fi already, but I think this will probably cement that.
Yeah.
And so I can just imagine
how old's your nephew?
12, turning 13.
Yeah,
Thanks, trying to decide his children.
I'm really contemplating trying to take my 6-year-old so I can watch it again.
But
I don't think so.
Yeah,
that's definitely a choice.
I was like, man, this is because I was like, this is dark. I don't know if this is. And I mean, I also don't know if my 6-year-old could sit through 3 hours, right?
No, I mean, my kids this year, just on New Year's Day, over a 2-day period, we watched all 3 Lord of the Rings films.
Pretty good.
And for their first time ever, and they loved them. Like they wanted to watch them the next day again. And I was like, I'm good. I'm like, I'm going to watch something else. Do you want to watch The Hobbit? And they're like, no.
He put on Survivor season 24. Let's just watch his kids.
Yes, exactly. Up to 34 now. So one question for me now. 2 things. Do we get 3? Which I think we will. And if we don't, are either of you really happy with this as the final thing we get out of this? I
was going to ask the same thing. Are you happy if this is all we get? I can go first if you want. For me, I think I am. I think where it ends, as a book reader, that's where it ends in the books. But I think I'm okay with leaving what happens next up to my imagination. Like, I think we get the message about Paul. We get the message about, charismatic leaders should come with a big warning. Like, I think it tells that story well. And I think if there is another movie, I think it will take us in a direction, you guys, that most people aren't expecting. It won't feel like a third movie to a trilogy. It'll feel like a sequel to a duology, I guess. I don't know how you want to say it, but
yeah, I had the same thought because I came into this expecting it to be the end, and when it did end, I was like, oh, this is like, the battle is over, but the war has just begun.
Yep.
But then I learned, that's when the book ends. I'm like, okay, so it definitely feels like it's begging for more content, but yeah, it does feel contained. It does feel like it ends in a naturally good spot of like, this story is finished, but stories beyond stories could go on forever. I'd be okay with it. I would definitely be like satisfied with it, and like, it ends it because it does end properly. But I'm really hoping there's a third one.
Yeah, I'm super keen for it.
Yeah, but yeah, you're right. Like, it would. I feel like it would be kind of almost like a 2 separate stories being told in a trilogy, which isn't a bad thing. It'd just be interesting to see what he does with it, I guess.
The thing, I think where they ended it, they've done it on purpose in a way of like, okay, if we don't do a third one, we've done it. Like we've ended the story, and it's at a point where it's like, Okay, wow, I really love that duology. You know, like that's they're really two good films. I hope we get a third one just because I love these movies so much where I'm like, take me back in there again. I want to see more stuff from this world by Denis on a big scale. And it's just the ending excited me for what to see that possibly happen. You know, we got Anna Taylor-Joy in there now. Like we can't just have her for a cameo. Like we've got Paul's visions of the future. Is that just showing us what will happen if he takes this path and that's left to our imagination or whatever?
Yeah.
But I think we will get it based off Denis' comments. He really wants Dune Messiah as the third one,
Yeah.
which is based off one of the books, and then
It is the second book. Yeah.
it's the second book. Yeah, so he's really pushing for it. He said obviously he's going to take a little break from it, but he really wants it.
Yeah.
I think I would be shocked if this is all we get. I would be shocked if we don't get a third one.
Yeah.
And yeah.
We used to
I
be
think-
excited for it if it's not Denis, if it's someone else.
Oh
Sweet.
no.
Oh, sweet baby James.
I wouldn't.
So-
I don't know if I would be.
It depends who it is. If it's David Fincher, hell yeah, plug it in my veins.
Yeah, Alien 3 did great with it.
If it's I don't know, Alan Taylor or someone, I'm like, no. Dear God,
Christopher
no.
Nolan.
It
Brett
truly
Ratner.
depends on who. It comes back. Brian Singer and Brett Ratner pair up to do it. Yeah, I don't like it just depends on who it is. I think we definitely do get unless this movie bombs, like I'm talking next weekend is like
Yeah.
90% drop off. I think we do because I think it will make money just based on the popularity, but also based on popularity, the initial success. Like I think pre-sale tickets had already like far exceeded huge amounts they were estimating or something. But also on like to your point, like Anya Taylor-Joy coming in, I think like their agents and these people being like, we want to do this. Even though I'm sure they'd be okay with signing on for one scene, I think there would be a big part of it. It's like, we all want to make this movie. We've signed on for more. Warner Brothers would feel some sort of pressure to that.
Yeah.
And if they're all wanting to do it, and you're just seeing Denny be like, yeah, I'm making this, it's successful. Critically, it's adored. Commercially, it's going to do well. Yeah, I don't see a world where they don't make a third unless it's just catastrophic next weekend.
Yeah. No, I do think it probably will happen. I'm satisfied with what we got. I'll be okay if we don't.
Yeah, I won't. Yeah, the best part about it is that he's like, I need to take a break, so he's going to make another movie between them. I'm like, yes, that's what I really want to see. I want to see like mix it up a bit.
Honestly, top 3 directors for me. I absolutely adore all of his stuff.
He's there. He's easily like
He's on a roll, man. He is on a
Yeah.
roll of like
Yep.
bangers after bangers after bangers.
yeah, he's doing good stuff. He's doing the Lord's work, truly.
All right. I think
Just as the prophecies told.
are we all tuned out? Do we need to get the sand out of our undies? We're all
Let's get the bucket out, boys. Let's go again.
Luke. Oh, do we want to rank them? I don't know. I think it's 2-1 in terms
that's
of
fair.
like quality, but
No, it is worth
they're
ranking
hard to
because
separate.
I've heard people say that they prefer the first one. To me, I like the second one is much better. Like
Yes.
the first one is a lot of setup for
Yep.
the second payoff.
Yep.
2-1.
Yeah, 2 is 2. You're right. 2 is the payoff to what's set up in the first one. Luke, what are you going to do to us next fortnight? What is this trilogy going to be?
So, all right. In the spirit.
Here's
that
another
we-
epic. Avengers.
No, in the spirit of like thematic trilogies and director trilogies that we've done recently.
This is a literal sequel to a film. What are you talking about?
No, not based off this one. Ones we've done
okay.
recently, you know. So next fortnight we will be doing Darren Aronofsky's Obsession trilogy. Now this is The Wrestler, Black Swan, and The Whale.
Oh, I'm there for it. Not so much the whale. That's a bit of a.
I've never seen it, but
Okay.
it ties in with the theme, I believe.
Is it streaming?
Yes, I think Amazon.
All right.
Yeah.
I am so excited to rewatch The Wrestler. Boy,
And we get to talk about these films.
Ryan is just going to be like.
Griner, have
It's
you
not that
watched? How many of these films have you watched?
I've seen Black Swan. That's the one I've
You
seen.
haven't seen The Wrestler?
No, I
Okay.
haven't.
True.
I haven't. Yeah, I thought you were I didn't. Yeah, I've never heard of this trilogy before.
I created it.
Did you?
But it's Darren Aronofsky, and it honestly, I think after you watch it, it'll be hard to.
See, I thought you were gonna add Requiem for a Dream in there, and I'm like, I don't know if I can watch that.
No.
Again.
Which is why I didn't. Trust me, the original trilogy was Requiem, Wrestler, and Black Swan, and I was like, it's a hard watch, and obviously that's Obsession as well. But I think the more focus point of like a singular character that follows their obsession into a point of their own demise or whatever, their downfall. It's these three films, and Requiem's a very hard watch. But a lot of his films, because dude, I was going to throw The Fountain in here at one point.
I was like you easily. Tonally, it's a bit different, but that is his. I think Obsession is kind of his main. Honestly, you could do any of his movies now.
I know.
There is not a single one
that's filmography.
That's not about Obsession.
Series. But those three will be our Obsession trilogy.
All right.
Cool.
I'm
keen for it too. All right. That's the end of this fortnight's podcast. It was brought to you by The God Grotesque, a new book by Conan C. Clarke. Check out his first one as well, The Taste of Iron trilogy. Is it a trilogy?
There's a third one coming.
The third one coming? Is it going to stop after 3?
We'll just have to
wait and see.
Pay money and see, I guess.
See if Warner Brothers greenlights a fourth.
Yeah.
Timothy Chalamet, get him.
All right. Thank you for joining us for the good, the bad, and the worst. Rate us on Spotify, please. Share us on social media. Tell your mum about us, and we'll catch you next time.
Subscribe.
Yeah, like and subscribe, all those. See ya.
Peace.
May your blade chip and shatter.